A long time ago, I used to talk about contrapositives a lot, and then it seemed like everybody came to class, not everybody, but almost everybody, and they just knew a lot about contrapositives. So spending a lot of time talking about contrapositives doesn't make a lot of sense. But they are something that's tested a lot in logical reasoning and in the games, and sometimes in reading comp very rarely. But we need to know that. So we need to make sure we're all on the same page. So I'm curious, when I say contrapositive, what the heck comes to mind? What do you guys know about contrapositives? If you don't know anything, that's great, because that's why we're talking about it right now. Let's clear it up. But what do you guys know and not know? Yeah.
It's like you have an if-then statement.
Okay, can you give me an example?
If I eat breakfast, then I will not be hungry.
Okay, that's an if-then statement. Are you guys cool with this? This is our if clause. It's always going to point to the then clause. Okay.
So the contrapositive of that will be, if I am hungry, then I will not have eaten breakfast.
Yep, if I'm hungry, then I must not have eaten breakfast. So how'd you get from here to here? What'd you do?
You flip it, you reverse it, and then you make them not positive or positive. You make them the opposite.
Of whatever they were. Yeah.
Yeah.
So here, you took this and you put it over here, and you took this and you put it over there.
Yes.
So you flipped the if and then, and then you negated both.
Yes.
So this was positive, so negating it made it negative. And this was negative, so negating it made it positive. So if you want to find the contrapositive, you have to switch and you have to negate. So you have to switch and negate. Now, what is the contrapositive? Like, why would we even try to find it? Anyone? You're like, cool, I know how to find it. But why on earth would I try to find it? What does it even mean?
It's something that's true.
Okay, it is something that's true.
So you could have a situation.
Now, I should add, if this is true.
Yes.
Okay? Now, so let's assume, for the sake of argument, that that's true. If that's true, then the contrapositive is another claim that must be true. Yeah.
Does it provide evidence? Because if you were not hungry and you had eaten breakfast, then the first if-then statement wouldn't have been proven.
Well, so in most cases, what's happening is the LSAT is telling us this, and we are accepting that as true. They're
Okay.
saying, hey, this is true. So we're not using this as evidence to support that because we already know that.
Okay.
In fact, it's the opposite. You're told this, and then you're saying, okay, well, you told me this. If that's true, then I now know that this is also true. And so being able to find the contrapositive is being able to take information that the LSAT gives you and figure out other things that must also be true given that initial claim, which is what they're essentially doing throughout the test, right? They're giving you claims and they're saying, hey, what has to be true? And you're like, well, this has to be true. And they're also asking you what doesn't have to be true. Now, the mistake that most people make, remember there's two steps. You have to switch and you have to negate. The biggest mistake that people make is they only do one or the other, right? So for example, if you say, if you eat breakfast, then you won't be hungry. Well, what happens if you don't eat breakfast?
You will be hungry.
Wait, what?
You will be hungry.
Okay, so that's our gut reaction, right? You're like, hey, if I eat breakfast, then I'm not going to be hungry. And someone's like, oh, that sucks. You're not getting breakfast today. You got to go to work. So in our life experience, we're like, oh, you're going to have to be hungry today. The problem, does anyone know why this doesn't necessarily follow from that? Yeah.
Because there could be another factor.
Okay.
That's not included, like maybe you had a big dinner the night before, so you're still not hungry yet.
Yeah.
You just can't make that claim as absolutely true.
Yeah. This right here is the if clause. Does anyone know the other name for the if clause?
Sufficient.
It's called the sufficient condition. This is called the sufficient condition, and the then clause is called
Necessary.
the necessary condition. Any guess why the if clause is called the sufficient condition? Okay, so in an if-then statement, you have two conditions, two events, right? Here's one event, and here's another event. And what an if-then statement does is it tells you the relationship between those two events, or those two conditions. And the if clause is called the sufficient condition because it's enough. It guarantees that the other condition will happen. So, if you eat breakfast, this sentence is telling you, you won't be hungry. Now, I'm sure there are people out there who eat breakfast and they're still hungry. This is not about reality, right? This is, the LSAT has told you, if you eat breakfast, then we are saying you will not be hungry. So you just have to accept that as true. Now, this is called the sufficient condition, so it guarantees that this will happen, but it's not, and this is really important because this is what we're accidentally doing, it's not called the necessary condition. It's not something that's required for you to not be hungry. But that's what you're thinking if you mistakenly conclude that not eating breakfast means you'll be hungry. You're thinking, oh, I had to eat breakfast if I wanted to not be hungry. No, it just guarantees that you won't be hungry. But other things might guarantee that as well. For example, eating a big dinner the night before. Maybe your genes just make it so you're not hungry in the morning, right, when you don't eat breakfast. I don't know. So this guarantees that you won't be hungry, but it's not the only thing, maybe, that will prevent you from being hungry. Maybe other things could lead to you not being hungry as well. Now, maybe this is a little hard to see. You're like, gosh, I just have to eat breakfast. Well, you're still thinking of breakfast as a necessary condition rather than as a sufficient condition. But the LSAT gave it to you here. They gave it to you as a sufficient condition. Let me give you one more example that might illustrate this. Well, before I do that, when you go here and you say, I'm sorry, you're not getting breakfast, so you're going to be hungry, you're treating a sufficient condition as if it were a necessary condition. And that's a logical flaw. I'm not saying this can't be true. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be true. Right? There's a difference. If this is true, then we're saying this has to be true, must be true. If this is true, then this certainly could be true. It just doesn't have to be true because maybe something else guarantees that you won't be hungry as well. Right?
So, excuse me, the difference in the wording, this one was, if I am hungry, then I must not have eaten breakfast.
That's
would
right.
Be the verbiage.
That's if you're hungry, then we know you didn't eat breakfast. And we can say that confidently because what did breakfast guarantee?
That you would not be hungry.
Yeah. So if someone eats breakfast, according to that rule, there's no way in hell that they could be hungry. So if someone walks in and says, well, I'm hungry, we're like, well, okay, we know for sure you didn't eat breakfast. Because if you had, you wouldn't be hungry. So that's why this claim follows logically from this claim and must be true, if that claim is true. This claim certainly could be true, but it doesn't have to be true, and so it's called a false contrapositive. And what's happened here is we've negated, but we didn't switch. Right? So if you negate, but don't switch, you're walking into trouble. Right? You're walking into something that certainly could be true, but doesn't have to be true. If you switch, but you don't negate, like if you say, if you're not hungry, then you must have eaten breakfast, you're making the same mistake. Notice this is switching. This came over here and this came over here, but we haven't negated. We just left them the way they were. That's another flaw. That's a false contrapositive because for the same reasons I just gave for this one. If you walk into this room and you're like, I'm not hungry, do we know for sure that you ate breakfast? Even though we know that breakfast would guarantee that you're not hungry, we know that, or we realize that other things could make you not hungry as well, like eating a big dinner the night before. So when someone walks in the room and says, hey, well, I'm not hungry, we can't necessarily conclude that they didn't eat breakfast, or that they did eat breakfast, right? For all we know, maybe they had a big dinner. So if you do this, then again, you're treating a sufficient condition as if it were a necessary condition. And that's a problem. So, when you encounter this flaw in logical reasoning, that's how they describe it. Have you guys seen those answer choices that say, this argument confuses a condition that is sufficient for running a mile with a condition that is necessary for doing the same. It's very wordy, right? That's the way they like to write. But the point is that you have essentially confused a if clause with a then clause. You have confused a necessary condition with a sufficient condition. You have either switched without negating or you've negated without switching. If you want to do the contrapositive correctly, you have to do both of these steps. Okay, so let me give you another example of why sufficient conditions are not necessary. If I said to you, if you run over my foot, then I will get angry. Sorry, I'm not perfect. If I were perfect, I might be forgiving. Just say it's okay. I get angry, okay? Does this mean that if you don't run over my foot, I won't be angry?
No.
Why not?
There's other factors.
There's other factors, like a bajillion other factors, right? How many things lead to us getting angry, right? So that's why this is a sufficient condition, not a necessary condition. If it were necessary, then I would need you to run over my foot to get angry. Now, if the LSAT says that, if they say that crazy stuff, then you have to just accept it. So if they say, if someone is angry, then they must have had their foot run over, then, can anyone tell me the contrapositive? Yes?
They don't have their foot run over, then they're not angry.
Yeah, if you don't have your foot run over, if your foot's never run over, then you won't get angry. Now that's crazy talk, right? We know people get angry for other reasons, but that doesn't matter. The LSAT's saying if someone's angry, then they must have had their foot run over. They're turning that running your foot over thing into a necessary condition. So if you don't have it, then you're not angry. Doesn't matter if it's inconsistent with our experience in the world. If we have to accept this is true, then we have to accept that as true. Sound good? Okay. Now, here's a pop quiz for you. And I actually don't want you to draw anything. Let's just see if you can get this emotionally. All right, so next weekend there's going to be a marathon, right? And if you win that marathon, if you come in first place, you get 10 grand. Sound good? Okay. Fast forward to the future. How many people participated in that? Anyone here? You're like, is this imaginary or is this?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Right?
Do I have an emotional response to that? Okay, so let's say, any volunteers here? Anyone want? Okay, so let's imagine that you ran it. I'm sorry, you didn't win. What do we now know?
Did not get $10,000.
Okay, how many people agree with that? She didn't win.
No. I didn't take
Okay, so you're saying you did get $10,000?
It's not that. You can picture it, but I can't put the words to,
It's okay.
because it's no longer the necessary.
You're like, I feel like you just messed with my mind or something. So what do you guys agree? What do you think?
So if you didn't get $10,000, then you didn't win the race, because that's what they're telling you based on the conditionals.
That's true. Yeah. So what happened here? She didn't win.
She didn't get $10,000.
So you're saying she didn't get $10,000?
Yeah.
Okay. So how many people say she didn't get $10,000? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. How many people say she did get $10,000? She got $10,000. Okay. How many? Well, some of us aren't voting. So what's up?
You don't know either way.
But you said she didn't. But I'm stuck on it. Well, she must not have gotten 10,000.
I don't know if there's a difference between that.
There's
Either
no?
she didn't or she must not have. That seemed to me like no 10,000.
No 10,000.
Yeah.
Based on the last example, so I am inclined to think that yes, no, she didn't get 10,000.
You're inclined to think that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because
So you're voting that she didn't get the 10
yeah,
grand.
because if we are given that as the premise, then of course she didn't get it.
let's talk about it. So if she won, right? She got first place.
What did she win?
Yeah, did she win?
No, did you say she
said
won?
she
I said
didn't win.
didn't.
She didn't win. I'm just
But
telling.
this is what the
This
first
is
premise was.
this is the rule, right? If you win, you get first place.
Yeah.
You get $10,000. Sweet. And we fast forward into the future. We said thank you for participating in this marathon. Have you ever run a marathon before?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. And we're gonna say yeah, you didn't win. You didn't get first place. Okay.
Oh.
So my question is, what do we know?
That she
Well,
didn't-
that's not a valid argument because then we didn't switch it.
We know that I didn't.
We know you didn't win. So did you get $10,000?
No.
We can't say anything.
We can't say. Now your gut, I get it. Your gut's like, oh yeah, you didn't get the money. Because I heard he said, if you get first place, you get 10 grand. She didn't get first place. Didn't get the money, right? Like that's our real world experience. This is how we say things all the time. So why is, okay, so is it possible that she didn't get 10 grand?
Yes.
Okay, I hope we all agree on that, right? Well, you didn't win, so it's possible you didn't get 10 grand. Why can't we say for sure that she didn't get 10 grand? Yeah.
We don't know if we
Because winning is insufficient, so she could have gotten like a raise, won the lottery, like anything else.
Okay, so a couple things. One, this is a sufficient condition, so this guarantees that you get 10 grand, but it's not necessary. We didn't say you have to win to get the 10 grand. We just said if you won, then you get 10 grand. So the absence of a sufficient condition doesn't do anything, right? Now you said maybe she got a raise, right? Yeah. So you run the race and you come in last or something like that, right? So, and then you're like, oh, but then your boss calls you and they're like, yeah, congrats, you got a raise, and I'm just gonna give it to you as a cash bonus right now, right? Oh, okay, you got $10,000. What else did you say?
Won the lottery.
Okay, you won the lottery, and you know this ameliorates all your failure and so forth. Let's imagine this for a second. Let's say that you came in second place. Could you have gotten $10,000 for coming in second place?
If that was the second place
Yeah,
prize.
that's the detail.
You didn't say.
Didn't say anything about that, right? I said if you win, you get 10 grand. And so the winner goes and they get 10 grand. They're like, sweet. And then second place, they're like, here you go, you get 10 grand too. Like, what? You know, like, I won. I put in that effort in the last minute because I wanted that money, and you're just gonna give him 10 grand as well? Like, what the, right? But the person who's running the race could say, I didn't say anything about second place, but we have a policy that we give everyone who participates 10 grand.
Oh, wow.
Right?
I would have walked.
Yeah, of course. We all would have shown up, but they didn't say that. So it's not that they said this is the only way to get 10 grand. They just said if you do this, you will get 10 grand. And oh, by the way, everyone else will as well.
Oh, okay.
Right? This is not inconsistent with that claim. So if someone wins, we know they get 10 grand. If they don't win, sure, it's certainly possible. Maybe it's even likely that they're not going to get any money. But when push comes to shove, we just don't know. We have no clue, right? And of course, on the LSAT, what they want you to do is they want you to conclude that they won't get money, and they give that to you as one of the answer choices. They say, hey, if the statements above are true, which one of mine must be true? And everybody's like, yeah, no, they're not going to get their money. That sucks. And then that's like answer choice A, right? So-and-so did not get the money. And you're like, yep. That's a false contrapositive, because what you've effectively done is what have you done? Can anyone describe it?
Make it sufficient and necessary.
You've confused the sufficient and necessary conditions.
You've negated, but you haven't switched.
You've negated, but you haven't switched. You said, you didn't win, therefore you didn't get the 10 grand. It's negating without switching. But, yes.
I just have a question though, because if it says, like, if you win the 10 grand, you could have won it in different ways, so you didn't necessarily win the race. Like if you
That's totally true as well. Yeah, that would be switching without negating, right? Like, if at the end of the day, you call up and you're like, hey, everybody, I just wanted to let you know I ran the race. It was real. And I got 10 grand. We can't our gut reaction would be like, oh, she must have won.
Mhm.
But that's not necessarily true. That certainly could be true, but that's also a false contrapositive because you're switching without negating. Maybe she got the 10 grand some other way. We'd have to ask further. Okay, you got 10 grand, cool. How'd you get it? Oh, well, I didn't get it from winning. I got it because I got a raise. Or I got it because they gave it to everybody, right? So these are both false contrapositives. This is negating without switching. This is switching without negating. They are certainly could be true. That's another mistake that people make, probably because their name is not great. False contrapositive sounds like they're false. They are things that could be true, but we just don't really know. That's the problem. Yeah.
So to answer a question that involves this, what you call this conditional reasoning,
Mm-hmm.
You have to get the sufficient and necessary right. You have to get the if-then right.
You have to identify the if clause and the then clause correctly. So right now, we're just making the if and the then very obvious, right? This is the if, this is the then. When we talk in future lessons, we'll talk about sentences that people read and they switch up the if and then because they're a little more hidden. They're not so direct. If this, then that, right? One simple way that people get mixed up, and we can just talk about it right now, it's going to seem silly, but it happens, is like if I wrote a sentence and I said, if I go to the store, then I'll be happy, right? If I go to the store, then I'll be happy. Well, what's the drawing for this? If S, then H, right? Well, imagine I wrote the same sentence, but I wrote it as, hey, I will be happy if I go to the store. What's the if-then drawing of this?
S.
If S, then H, right? Because my if clause is right here, and then that's my sufficient condition, and this is my necessary condition. So when I draw it, I'm going to draw it like this. But you wouldn't believe how many test takers, maybe 30%, read this, and they go, oh, okay, if-then statement, got it. And why do they do that? Because they're just looking at the order of the sentence. Right? You're like, no, the order of the sentence doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the meaning. You can switch sentences around and change the meaning, or without changing the meaning. Yeah.
So how would you properly negate the first one? Like if I go to the store, then I'll be happy. What would the
Oh, how would you find the contrapositive?
Yeah.
So you want to switch and negate. So if you switch and negate,
Mhm.
what would you predict?
If I'm happy, then I went to the store.
Okay, so
Then
if you
didn't
say
go to the store.
if you're happy that you go to the store, what you've done is you've
Yeah,
switched.
you didn't negate.
You didn't negate. So go ahead and negate.
Well, I don't know which. Like,
You're going to
I'm
negate
inclined-
both conditions.
oh, you can. So if I'm not happy.
Not you can, you must.
Oh, if I'm not happy that I didn't go to the store.
If I'm not happy that I didn't go to the store. That's exactly
Oh, okay. I thought you only negated the one, and I was like, I don't
right.
understand.
No,
how
yeah,
this
this is a
makes
little
sense.
confusing here because this is positive and this is negative.
Okay.
But notice the negation of positive is not B,
Mhm.
and the negation of negative is H.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So this is more for like logical reasoning. So if the LSAT gives us an if-then clause,
Yep.
does the then clause have to happen like exactly the way it was described? Like just for other like say for
Yeah.
instance like you can't win 9,000 instead of 10,000.
Oh.
But not only that, but like in LR the words might be like a synonym.
Slightly different, yeah,
Slightly
yeah.
different. What do I do in those cases?
Well, so this is actually one reason why drawing these things out can kind of mess you up. I'm drawing it out here so we get the idea in our head and we got to flip and negate, but the reality is you're negating the whole thing. Right? You're saying this entire thing doesn't happen. So if any element of it doesn't happen, then you've negated it. So if I say if you win, then you get 10 grand, and you get 10 grand in a hat.
Yeah, something like
Okay, that's weird, right? Oh, okay, if you win, then you get 10 grand a hat. And then you call up, what was your name again? Sorry.
Sydney.
Sydney calls up and says, hey guys, I got 10 grand, but it wasn't in a hat, it was in a shoe, right? And I didn't get any other money. Then we would know that you did not get 10 grand in a hat. which means you must not have won. Because if you had, this would have happened and this didn't happen. So any element of that could be negated. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'm not drawing these things, I'm just reading the sentence, but I'm aware of, oh, everything in this part of the sentence is the sufficient condition, and everything over here is in the then is the necessary condition. And then let's just go from there. Okay, so contrapositive, if not in a hat or not 10 grand, then you didn't win. Sound good? All right. While we're on the topic, since it is going to come up again for sure, let me just do this. If you go outside, then you will not cry. Sound good? Okay, now is that true? Anyone here ever cried outside? If you have, then this is not true for you. Okay? Because this says, if you go outside, you will not cry. Like it's impossible. Sound good? Okay, now, Sarah is not crying. Sarah is not crying. Conclusion. By the way, I always put my conclusions below the line, even if they are stated earlier in the argument. Therefore, Sarah must be outside. Okay? Is this argument valid?
No.
Okay? How many people say no? How many people say yes? How many people say I don't know? Okay? This argument is invalid, and the reason it's invalid is that whether or not something's valid, whether or not a conclusion is valid, depends on whether it follows logically from the premises provided. If I go outside, then I'm definitely not going to cry. We know that Sarah is not crying. Does that necessarily mean that she's outside? No, what you're doing is you're going backwards. You have what?
Switch, but not negated.
You switch, but you're not negated. Now that's our language. How would the LSAT describe this?
Confused, it must be true, but it could be true.
They don't usually say that, but that is true as well. Like this could be true. She could be outside. I'm not saying that she doesn't have to be outside, but she could be. But we don't know that for sure. She's treated. What's this right here? It's a necessary condition for what? Well, so she does confuse necessary with sufficient, but this is a necessary condition for going outside. It's a necessary condition for going outside because if you go outside, you can't cry. I'm watching Chernobyl right now, so for some reason I want to say, welcome to Russia. Like, there's just so many rules. Right? You go outside, you can't cry. It's my random assessment of that regime right now. That was in the past. Okay. Anyways, it's treating a necessary condition for going outside as if what? As if it were sufficient. As if, oh, you're not crying, therefore that must mean you're outside. And then you're treating a sufficient condition as if it were necessary. Right? So the person who made this argument is assuming that not going out or not crying means you're outside. They're assuming that even though they said this. Right? And so they have confused a sufficient condition with a necessary condition, or they've confused a necessary condition with a sufficient condition. So if you ever saw this argument on the test and it was a flaw question, the correct answer would use the terms necessary and sufficient and say that the author mixed them up. The significance of that is that when you see this flaw, you know that's the correct answer. And when you don't see this flaw, you know that that answer choice, which is very common, is wrong. Right? Like for a lot of people, it's a tempting wrong answer because they're like, oh, like I don't know exactly what this is saying. Maybe this is happening here. Maybe there was a necessary thing, and it was confused with a sufficient thing, I don't know, so they keep it open. But if you don't see this whole false contrapositive thing going on, you know that the answer choice is wrong. Questions? Yeah.
So what would you advise that we draw out this diagram just on because I have a particular problem with I think parallel reasoning. Sometimes I get very jargony, and so it's like hard to follow the.
So diagramming is a double-edged sword in the sense that when you start diagramming, you're starting to simplify, and then you may lose sight of the bigger picture. I'm diagramming now so that we see if and then and how they're getting mixed up. But my hope is that after you maybe diagram for a little bit, you move away from that and you just start, and maybe even move away right now. Like you see an if-then statement on the page, you're like, okay, I get it. I'm not going to draw it, but I get it. There's an if clause here, there's a then clause here. And all of a sudden they're talking about the then clause, and they should have been talking about the if clause, and then they drew a conclusion about the if clause. That's weird, they're going backwards. You don't need to draw it, you just start to see that. If you struggle, maybe draw it out, but we're trying to move away from that. Partly because of what Don was talking about, you have these clauses that are way more than just one variable. And you can oversimplify it when you draw it. Or people draw it incorrectly. I mean, it happens all the time with that if clause coming at the end, and they all of a sudden they flip around and they're drawing. Now they're just walking right into the wrong answer. Because they're like, they might get the concept, but now because they're drawing it's backwards, they're like, oh, this looks good. So, we'll keep talking about it though. It'll sink in. Any other questions? Okay.